Fascism is one of the most notorious political ideologies of the 20th century. Fascism is typically only thought of in tandem with Nazi Germany, but it wasn't the only country that adhered to the ideology, and in fact, they weren't even the first. It originated in Italy. Despite many similarities between fascist Italy and Germany, the two nations developed different forms of fascism with significant ideological differences. Learn more about Italian and German fascism, their differences and similarities, on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily.
Rinse takes your laundry and hand-delivers it to your door, expertly cleaned and folded, so you could take the time once spent folding and sorting and waiting to finally pursue a whole new version of you. Like Tea Time You. Or this Tea Time You. Or even this Tea Time You.
Said you hear about Dave?
Or even Tea Time You.
So update on Dave.
It's up to you. We'll take the laundry. Rinse. It's time to be great.
Black Friday savings are here at the Home Depot, which means it's time to add new cordless power to your collection. Right now, when you buy a select battery kit from one of our top brands like Ryobi or Milwaukee, you'll get a select tool from that same brand for free. Click into one of our best deals of the season and stock up on tools for all your upcoming projects. Get Black Friday savings happening now at the Home Depot. Limit 1 per transaction. Exclusions apply. Full eligible tool list in-store and online.
When you hear the word fascism, one thing tends to come to mind: Nazi Germany. But if you go a little further, you may also think of Italy, the other fascist country that aligned with Germany during the war. Despite being the first fascist country, many people don't know much about Italian fascism or simply view it as the same as the Nazis. And while there were plenty of similarities, there are also distinct differences between Italian and German fascism. But before we get into those differences, it's important to understand what fascism is. Fascism is defined as a far-right extremist political ideology and mass movement that emphasizes extreme nationalism and strong autocratic central government led by a dictator. Fascist society is characterized by the discipline and organization of society and the economy, often through forced suppression of opposition. Fascists and fascist governments typically begin as a revolutionary movement. Fascists advocate for the overthrowing of the existing government and the suppression of current or potential political enemies. Fascists also tend to favor the traditional values of whatever country they appear in. They emphasize extreme nationalism, militarism, and the prioritization of the state over individuals. The person we can point to as the creator of fascism was Benito Mussolini, an Italian. Mussolini was previously a socialist and was a member of the Italian Socialist Party. However, he was expelled from the party for supporting Italian involvement in World War I, believing the war created the conditions for a vast socialist movement. Following his expulsion from the party, Mussolini denounced it and radically shifted his focus to Italian nationalism. He began to reject socialist ideas, believing that the war made national identity and loyalty to the state more important than class distinctions. Mussolini began to create a new political ideology known as fascism. His ideas about fascism are said to come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato and his book, The Republic. Ideas taken from The Republic include the need for a powerful state led by a strong central figure. In the book, Plato also rejects ideas of social equality and emphasizes that individuals should act in accordance with the needs of the state. There were plenty of differences between the Republic and fascist ideology, the main one being that fascism promoted expansionism, whereas Plato was completely opposed to war unless it was for defensive purposes. The roots of fascism can be traced back prior to Mussolini, including ideas such as social Darwinism and the prioritization of society over the individual, among others. But the first organized movement can be credited to Benito Mussolini. No longer believing in class struggle, Mussolini founded the Fasci di Azione Rivoluzionaria in 1914. Its members call themselves fascisti, or fascists. The word fascist comes from the Italian term fascista, which itself derives from fascio, meaning a bundle or group, and ultimately from the Latin fasces. The fasces were bundles of rods bound around an axe, carried by Roman lictors as a symbol of magisterial authority and the power to punish or coerce. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Italian political groups used fascio to describe leagues or associations unified for a common cause. When Benito Mussolini founded his movement, he deliberately drew on this symbolism of collective strength bound together under a single authority. From this, fascismo and the English word fascist emerged, carrying the connotation of authoritarian unity and enforced political cohesion. Mussolini's movement was initially small, unorganized, and ineffective. Party meetings were interrupted and harassed by the government and other political parties. These early interruptions created conflict between different groups and created the basis for fascists to support political violence. Mussolini took a short break from politics during World War I when he was called into service, but after he returned, he went back to politics. He reformed his party and created the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, or the Italian Combat Squad. This time, the movement was more organized and the ideology better formed. He introduced a full party platform, including his foreign policy. This foreign policy, known as Spazio Vitale, is similar to the Nazi policy of Lebensraum. The goal of this policy was to regain the territory of ancient Rome. Additionally, Mussolini began to paint Italy as a proletarian nation, as opposed to countries like Britain, which were considered plutocratic. This basically means that countries like Britain, where wealth was held by a small ruling group, were preventing countries like Italy, with a strong working class, from acquiring the territory they needed to grow their economies. According to Mussolini, poverty in Italy could only be solved by securing the space to grow its economy. One of the key aspects we associate today with fascism is racism. While this was present with some Italian fascisms, it was more of an undertone and not a key component like it was with the Nazis. Mussolini did maintain that there was a natural law where the strong people dominated the inferior people. But in Mussolini's case, he often portrayed the people of Yugoslavia and Africa as being inferior. He was specifically threatened by birth rates, especially those in Africa and Asia. He viewed history as a battle of demographics, with larger countries defeating smaller ones. Therefore, he advocated for high birth rates to ensure Italian power. The Italian fascist movement, as well as other fascist movements, was traditional, which in many ways is contradictory to its revolutionary nature. They were conservative in their beliefs that emphasized traditional social institutions, but were revolutionary as they wanted to create a sudden, rapid movement to overthrow and change society. Mussolini also founded the political newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia and also created an international version of his fascist movement. One of the key aspects of Mussolini's fascist party was the black shirts. Similar to the German stormtroopers or SA, the black shirts sought to restore order on Italy's streets. This was done through clashes with other groups, including communists, socialists, and anarchists, during demonstrations and parades. The violent actions of the black shirts were often ignored, as Italian leadership was more frightened of a communist revolution than a fascist one, given the communist takeover of Russia just a few years before. Mussolini's fascist party rapidly gained support and became the National Fascist Party. In 1921, Mussolini was elected to the Chamber of Deputies in the Italian Congress. And just 1 year later, Mussolini began his full fascist takeover. Marching with 30,000 black shirts in Rome, Mussolini demanded that the liberal prime minister, Luigi Facta, resign. As the king took no action against this movement, Facta resigned, and the king appointed Mussolini as the new prime minister. During his first few years as prime minister, Mussolini began to consolidate his power. He succeeded in doing so and established a totalitarian state with himself as the supreme leader, also known as El Duce. Fascism in Germany began differently. Although Italy also struggled with the aftermath of World War I and felt cheated, Germany was decimated by the end of the war and the Treaty of Versailles. This led to Germany as a state becoming incredibly unstable, with multiple groups rising to challenge the Weimar Republic. One of these organizations was the German Workers' Party, which was joined by Adolf Hitler. Mussolini's March on Rome brought international attention to the fascist movement and inspired other movements, most notably led by Adolf Hitler. After hearing about the success of Mussolini's fascist party, Hitler began to model his own party on the Italian movement after being elected head of the German Workers' Party. One of the first actions Hitler took was to rename the party the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. The idea behind the name was to appeal to people on both sides of the spectrum, German nationalists on the right and socialists on the left. Despite quite literally having socialist in their name, Hitler advertised the party as being anti-socialist and international communist. His ideology was meant to advance the power and welfare of the German people, not any particular economic class, and certainly not any international movement. The party under Hitler's leadership began to stabilize, creating a 25-point plan. This plan centered on ideas of anti-Semitism, nationality, expansionism, called for the ending of the Treaty of Versailles, and the formation of a paramilitary group known as the Stormtroopers or the SA. The Nazi Party was a small fringe movement, but it intended to follow Mussolini's path. Emulating the March on Rome, Hitler and the Nazis attempted their own coup, but this failed and Hitler was sent to jail for 5 years, only serving 8 months. The Nazis painted themselves as opposed to communism, against the Treaty of Versailles, promised higher unemployment and pensions, preached the supremacy of the German people, utilized paramilitary groups, promised to reindustrialize the military, and most importantly, provided a scapegoat for all of Germany's problems: the Jews. After his release from jail, Hitler and the Nazis pursued an electoral strategy, and this plan was much more successful, and by 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. After being elected, Hitler used a series of political maneuvers and tactical violence to destroy German democracy and establish a dictatorship with him at the core. Despite both Germany and Italy being called fascist, there are actually quite a few differences between German and Italian fascism. However, before going into those, I think it's important to understand the similarities. In both Italian and German cases, the fascist movements rejected Enlightenment ideology. During the Enlightenment, the focus was placed on the individual. Instead, the fascists emphasized the importance of the people and the nation as being paramount over the individual. Additionally, fascists in both states had a system that sought total control over the state, the economy, and society. Both fascist parties sought to completely take over all spheres of life, down to the thoughts of the people. This allowed them to emphasize allegiance to the party as being the same as the state. Many of their ideas of control were due to the negative views of human nature that they had. Fascists believe that the masses are lacking in intellect and therefore prone to manipulation, especially through tools of propaganda. Both Italian and German fascism were highly nationalistic, promoting the belief in their nation's superiority over others. This nationalism resulted in both nations' militaristic and expansionist foreign policy. The main difference between the different forms of fascism has to do with the concept of race. While both fascist states participated in and perpetuated racism, Germany placed significantly more importance on racial ideology. Mussolini initially rejected Nazi-style biological racism, as he viewed fascism as a nationalist movement, not a racial one. Racism within Italy was more based around Italianness, which was able to include groups like the Jews, some of whom had joined the fascist party. In fact, in 1932, Mussolini famously said, quote, "Race? It's a feeling, not a reality. 95% at least is a feeling. Nothing will ever make me believe that biologically pure races can be shown to exist today." End quote. Despite initially rejecting ideas of biological racism, the Italians did eventually adopt German racial policies. In 1938, the Italian fascists openly endorsed the Manifesto of Race, which in one of its points said, quote, "It's time that Italians proclaim themselves to be openly racist," end quote. And this was largely due to Germany's influence over Italy. This escalated after Germany occupied Italy in September of 1943. Under German occupation, Italy enacted Nazi-style racial laws and participated in the events of the Holocaust. Although Italy did eventually adopt Nazi policies, it was never a core belief in the foundation of the Italian Fascist Party at its outset. Another difference between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy was how totalitarian the government was. Unlike the Nazis, Mussolini was never able to fully eliminate his opposition. The king and the Catholic Church still threatened Mussolini's bureaucratic control. So Italian fascists, while packing many bureaucratic sectors, still operated within the existing structures of the Italian state, whereas the Nazis completely rewrote them. One final difference between the two countries was in how culture was treated. Hitler and the Nazis purged large amounts of literature, destroyed what they considered deviant art, and controlled and restructured universities around Nazi ideas. In comparison, this really wasn't the case in Italy. Mussolini never launched campaigns against works of art or artists as Hitler did. Italian culture remained largely intact during the fascist period, as the fascists weren't trying to completely remake Italian society like the Nazis were. The lesson is that despite many similarities between German and Italian forms of fascism, and there were many, there were also differences. Germany and Italy were not simple carbon copies of each other. These differences can be attributed to leadership, the way the parties took political power, and the cultures of each respective country. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Austin Oetken and Cameron Kieffer. Research and writing for this episode was provided by Olivia Ash. My big thanks go to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon. Your support helps make this podcast possible. And I also want to remind everyone about the community groups on Facebook and Discord. This is where everything happens that's outside of the show. As always, if you leave a review on any major podcast app or in the above community groups, you too can have it read on the show.